I woke up thinking it was just another ordinary morning, but before the sun set, I'd lose my job, my dignity, and almost the only person I had left in this world. I've learned that when you live paycheck to paycheck, the world doesn't give you time to breathe. It just keeps spinning, faster and faster, daring you to keep up. That morning the alarm screamed at 4:45 a.m., same as always, and I silenced it before my son could stir in the next room. The walls between us were paper thin, but even in sleep, he had a way of feeling every storm that passed through me. I sat there for a while, staring at the ceiling, trying to summon the strength to do it all again. Another day of work, worry, and pretending everything was fine. The city outside was still half asleep, but I could already hear the faint hum of buses and distant sirens, the heartbeat of a world that never waited for anyone to catch up. Our apartment wasn't much. Cracked paint, a flickering kitchen light, and a heater that gave up halfway through winter. But it was home. A home built on late nights, double shifts, and the quiet promise I made to my wife before she passed, that our boy, Ethan, would never grow up feeling like life had cheated him. When I walked into the kitchen, Ethan was already awake, bent over his notebook, his hair sticking up like it always did when he was thinking hard. His drawings covered half the table, airplanes, engines, and blueprints that made no sense to me, but clearly meant the world to him. "Morning, Dad," he said, not looking up. "Morning, champ. You sleep at all?" He grinned. "Didn't need to. I'm almost done with my science project." His eyes, his mother's eyes, lit up when he spoke, and I couldn't help but smile even though my chest tightened. He deserved a life with more than second-hand dreams and reheated dinners. But for now, all I could give him was effort, and that had to be enough. I poured coffee, burned my tongue on the first sip, and watched him scribble notes like a boy who still believed the world was fair. I wanted to keep it that way for as long as I could. "Big day today," I said, glancing at the clock. 6:10. I needed to be on the 6:30 train to make it to the tower by 8. "You'll be great at the fair. You'll come, right?" he asked. That question caught me off guard every time, the way hope lived in his voice. I hesitated, just long enough for him to notice. "I'll try, buddy. You know how work is." He looked down, fiddling with his pencil. "You always say that." I wanted to tell him that work was the only reason we still had lights, still had heat, still had each other, but he was 12. He shouldn't have to understand sacrifice yet. So I forced a smile and said, "This time I'll make it. Promise." The clock ticked louder than usual, each second a warning I couldn't afford to ignore. I grabbed my jacket from the hook, checked my phone. 2 missed notifications, both bills, and slipped it into my pocket. "Don't forget your lunch," he said, holding out a paper bag with my name written in marker. I laughed softly. "What would I do without you?" He shrugged, grinning. "Starve." We both laughed, and for a moment everything was okay. The kind of okay that only exists in fragile mornings before life remembers to be cruel. Then I checked the time again. 6:29. I kissed the top of his head, grabbed my bag, and headed for the door. The hallway smelled of rain and old paint, the kind of scent that never leaves a building that's seen too many tenants come and go. My boots echoed down the narrow stairs as I mentally ran through the day's plan. Train, clock in, avoid Reed's lectures, finish the shift, maybe get back in time to see Ethan's project. It sounded simple until life decided otherwise. Outside, the streets were slick with last night's rain. Streetlights flickered over puddles that mirrored the city's gray dawn. I tightened my jacket, feeling the wind cut through the seams, and started the familiar walk to the station. Every morning was the same cracked sidewalks, the same tired faces at the bus stop, the same illusion that if I just worked hard enough, I'd somehow catch up. When I got to the platform, the digital board blinked red. Delayed. A single word that sent my stomach into knots. I checked my watch. 6:52. I needed that train. By the time it arrived, I was already sweating from anxiety. The car was packed, the air thick with the smell of wet coats and too many dreams. I stood shoulder to shoulder with strangers, staring at my reflection in the window, a man with tired eyes, a frayed jacket, and hands that looked older than they should. The train crawled through the tunnels like it was moving through mud. 7:36, then 7:47. I could feel the minutes slipping away like sand through a cracked glass. Every delay was a nail in the coffin of the only thing keeping our lives afloat: my job. When the train finally screeched to a halt, I bolted out, sprinting through the rain-soaked streets, my bag bouncing against my side. The city was alive now. Horns, voices, footsteps. But all I heard was the pounding of my heart. By the time the Langford Tower came into view, the clock on my phone read 8:04. I tried to steady my breathing before walking in. Maybe if I looked calm enough, no one would notice. But the moment I swiped my badge, Reed's voice cut through the lobby. "Late again, Carter." I turned, chest still heaving. He stood near the desk, coffee in hand, that smug half-smile that made my stomach turn. "You know the policy. One more time and you're done." I started, but stopped when my phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something in me hesitated. I pulled it out, glanced at the screen. One new voicemail. The preview read, "This is St. Luke's Hospital. It's so, about your son?" The room tilted. The air vanished. I barely heard Reed talking anymore. My throat went dry, and all I could hear was Ethan's voice from this morning. Bright, full of hope, asking if I'd be there for his project. I turned, already moving toward the door, my pulse hammering in my ears. My legs felt weak, my vision blurry, but none of it mattered. I just knew I had to get to him. And then I heard it. Behind me. Faint, but unmistakable. "Dad, wait!" I froze. For a moment, time stopped, between the sound of his voice and the weight of the words I'd just read. That one word, wait, became the line between the life I thought I was holding together and the one that was about to fall apart. I used to tell myself that sweeping floors wasn't shameful until the day someone made me believe it was. Langford Industries looked beautiful from the outside. 47 floors of glass and steel reflecting the morning sun, the kind of building that made people slow down just to stare at it, the kind of place that whispered success in every direction. But when you work inside a place like that long enough, you learn that beauty is a costume, one that hides all the cracks underneath. I'd been a janitor there for almost 6 years. Every tile, every stairwell, every hallway had passed beneath my mop at some point. I knew the building better than most of the people who signed my paychecks, because while they came and went, I was the one who stayed behind to clean up the footprints they left. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. And in a world where honesty doesn't buy much, it was still the one thing I could hold on to. The morning after that voicemail from the hospital, everything felt heavier. My body moved on instinct, grab supplies, clock in, check the rotation chart. But my mind was somewhere else entirely. I hadn't slept properly in days, and the only thing keeping me upright was the thought that this job, as small as it seemed, was the only thread holding our lives together. Langford's janitorial crew wasn't big, just 7 of us covering an empire of offices. There was Sam, who'd been there long enough to hate everyone equally. Maria, who hummed old country songs when the night shift got too quiet. And Aaron, the kid fresh out of community college who thought this was temporary until he found something better. We all had our reasons for being there, and none of them were happy ones. Our supervisor, Reed, was the kind of man who loved rules more than people. His shoes clicked louder than his voice, his tie was always too tight, and he had this look, a mix of superiority and boredom, like managing us was beneath him, but firing us gave him a reason to wake up in the morning. The company had a zero lateness policy, and Reed treated it like scripture. You could mop the entire lobby with a broken arm and no one would care, but if you clocked in even 60 seconds late, your name went on his list. And once it was on that list, you were one step away from gone. I'd made it 6 years without missing a shift. 6 years without being late, without complaining, without asking for more than what was barely enough. My coworkers called me the Ghost because I moved quietly, did my job, and disappeared before anyone remembered I was there. I didn't mind. I wasn't there to be noticed. I was there to survive. Every morning, I'd step into that lobby and see my reflection in the polished marble floors, the same floors I scrubbed every night. The smell of disinfectant and lemon polish clung to my hands so deep that even after I washed them at home, it lingered like a reminder of who I was. Sometimes, as the executives passed by in their tailored suits, their shoes clicking on the spotless floor I'd spent hours perfecting, I'd look up and wonder if any of them even knew the name of the man who kept their world clean. Still, there was pride in that invisibility. There was a strange satisfaction in knowing that something I did mattered, even if no one saw it. Ethan used to ask me why I worked so hard if no one noticed. I told him, "Because someday you will, and that'll be enough." That morning, the air inside Langford felt tense. Reed was pacing near the time clock, clipboard in hand, waiting for someone to slip. I could tell from his smirk that he was hungry for it. Someone's mistake, someone's failure, just enough reason to make an example. I nodded at him when I walked in, avoiding eye contact, and went straight to the supply room. "You're cutting it close," Sam muttered as I clocked in. "Train delay," I said, wiping my forehead. He shook his head. "Reed's been asking about you. Watch yourself." I didn't answer. The truth was, I could feel something shifting beneath my feet. A slow, inevitable slide toward trouble. The voicemail from the hospital had played over and over in my head that morning, the words looping until they didn't sound real anymore. "It's about your son." I hadn't called back yet. I couldn't. Because whatever that call meant, I wasn't ready to hear it. I pushed the thought down and started my rounds. The building was still quiet, the calm before the corporate storm. I worked floor by floor, polishing, dusting, collecting the discarded coffee cups and crumpled memos left behind by people who'd never think twice about who cleaned up after them. That was the rhythm of my life. Erase every trace of someone else's day while trying not to leave a mark of my own. Around mid-morning, Reed appeared again. He didn't talk to us often, but when he did, it was always to remind us how replaceable we were. "Carter," he said, snapping his fingers as if summoning a servant. "I need you in Conference Hall B spillage on the carpet. Big client meeting at 10. "I'm on it," I said, grabbing the cart. "Be quick," he added, glancing at his watch. "And remember, appearance is everything." His words stung more than I wanted to admit. I wasn't a man who cared much for ego, but there was something in his tone, that casual dismissal, that made me feel smaller than usual. Still, I nodded and went to work. The rest of the day passed in slow motion. Every task felt heavier, every second stretched thin. By the time lunch rolled around, I wasn't hungry. I just sat in the janitor's closet, staring at my phone, thumb hovering over the hospital number. I wanted to call, but I also wanted to pretend that nothing had changed. Because if I didn't know, then maybe it wasn't real yet. When I finally stepped outside for a breath of air, the city was glowing under the midday sun. Executives hurried past, clutching their lattes and phones, barking orders into headsets. No one looked down. No one saw the man leaning against the pillar with a mop handle in his hand, staring up at the sky like it might offer an answer. It was around then that I overheard 2 interns talking near the front doors. "Did you hear?" one said. "Reed's been watching the janitors like a hawk lately. Someone's getting written up today." "Who?" "Not sure," he said. "One of the old ones." My stomach sank. There weren't many of us who qualified as old. By late afternoon, the exhaustion had settled deep in my bones. I finished the last hallway, stored the supplies, and clocked out for the day, my mind already racing with how to manage rent if something went wrong. I told myself I'd be early tomorrow, earlier than ever, just to be safe. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan's face, pale and quiet, and the words, "It's about your son," played in my head like a broken record. When the alarm screamed the next morning, I was already awake. I dressed faster than usual, checked my watch 3 times, and left before dawn. The air was sharp, the streets still empty. This time, I told myself, nothing would go wrong. But fate doesn't care about good intentions. The train was late again, not by much, 5 minutes, maybe 6, but enough to tighten the clock around my throat. I ran from the station, heart pounding, bag slamming against my side, every second screaming louder than the last. The tower's glass walls glimmered in the distance like a finish line I couldn't reach fast enough. My legs burned, my lungs ached, but I pushed harder. I turned the final corner just as the church bells down the street began to chime. I could see the building entrance now, the polished brass doors, the security guard glancing at his watch. I looked up. The clock over the revolving doors ticked from 8:58 to 8:59. 2 blocks still stood between me and survival. The elevator doors closed at 8:59, and I was still 2 blocks away. The worst part of being invisible is that nobody waits to hear your side of the story. By the time I reached the revolving doors of Langford Tower, my lungs felt like they were on fire. The city outside pulsed with life, indifferent to my panic. I could still see the clock through the glass, 8:59 and 30 seconds. My reflection flickered against the marble floor as I swiped my badge and stumbled into the lobby, praying the time clock hadn't registered me late. But Reed was already waiting. He stood near the front desk like a judge waiting for a verdict he'd already decided. His tie was perfectly centered, his arms crossed, and behind him, 2 security guards watched with the blank interest of men used to routine humiliation. "Carter," he said, his voice smooth but sharp. "You're late." "It was the train," I gasped, trying to catch my breath. "There were delays. I ran all the way from—" He raised a hand, cutting me off before I could finish. "Excuses don't clock you in. Rules are rules. You know the policy." The words hit harder than I expected. Around us, the morning rush had begun. Executives striding past in tailored suits, heels clicking against the tile, phones pressed to ears, voices echoing. Not one of them slowed down. To them, I wasn't a person. I was part of the scenery, another piece of the building that kept itself clean. "Reed, please," I said, lowering my voice. "I've been here 6 years. Never missed a shift. You know me." "I know you're late," he replied flatly. I could feel every eye in the lobby turning toward me. The guards shifted their weight, waiting for orders. Somewhere nearby, the front desk printer whirred and beeped, the sound of indifference. For a second, I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him about the hospital call, about my son, about the life I was trying to hold together with threads that kept breaking. But the words stuck in my throat. There's a kind of pride that lives deep inside men like me, men who've lost enough already. Begging felt like another loss I couldn't afford. "Just listen," I tried again. "My kid—" "Save it," Reed snapped. "You've been warned twice before. 3rd time's final. Hand in your badge." He held out his hand, palm open, waiting. The silence between us felt heavy enough to crush bone. Slowly, I unclipped the plastic card from my uniform and placed it in his hand. My fingers trembled, but I kept my face still. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a voice whispered, "Don't give him the satisfaction." Reed looked down at the badge as if it was a trophy. "You'll receive your final check at the end of the day. Security will escort you to collect your things." "I don't need an escort," I said quietly. He smiled without warmth. "It's company policy." That phrase, company policy, felt like a knife twisting in my gut. It was the same sentence used to explain every act of cruelty I'd seen in that place. People fired, hours cut, lives reduced to paperwork, all justified by policy. As he turned away, one of the guards motioned for me to follow. The walk through the halls I'd cleaned for years felt longer than it ever had before. The floors were spotless, the windows gleamed, and for the first time I realized how much of my life I'd poured into maintaining someone else's perfection. When we reached the supply closet, my cart was still there. Neat, organized, the mop handle leaning where I'd left it. I ran a hand over the label with my name on it, already half faded. 6 years of service, gone in 60 seconds. I packed slowly. My gloves, my thermos, the brown paper lunch bag Ethan had made for me, still sitting unopened. Every item felt heavier than it should have. As I stepped into the elevator, one of the guards pressed the button for the basement. The ride down was silent, except for the hum of machinery and the faint echo of footsteps above us. I could smell the faint mix of cleaning supplies that clung to my clothes. I thought about rent due in 5 days, about the pharmacy bill I'd been paying off in installments, about the doctor's number still saved in my voicemail. I thought about Ethan's smile that morning and the promise I'd made to be there for his project. And then I thought about how I was going to walk through our apartment door tonight and tell him that everything had fallen apart. The elevator doors slid open. The guard nodded toward HR, where a receptionist sat behind a desk, expression blank, envelope already in hand. "Carter?" she asked. I nodded. She slid the envelope across the counter without meeting my eyes. "Sign here." My signature came out shaky. The ink bled slightly on the cheap paper, like even the pen didn't want to finish the job. "That's it," she said. I took the envelope. It felt light, almost insultingly so, considering how much weight it carried. The guard stepped back, waiting for me to leave. I turned to go, my throat tight but dry. There were no words left that wouldn't sound like defeat. As I stepped into the corridor, I heard the familiar echo of expensive shoes on marble. The sound carried power, measured, unhurried. I glanced up, expecting another executive who wouldn't notice me. But it wasn't Reed this time. It was a man I'd only seen in company newsletters and framed photographs. The CEO himself. He was older than I'd imagined, with a calmness that made people step aside without being told to. His suit was immaculate, his posture easy, but his eyes, sharp, observant, caught mine as he passed. For a moment, he slowed. Just half a second. Our eyes met. There was no recognition, no words, but something flickered there. Curiosity, maybe empathy, or something I couldn't name. Then he was gone, swallowed by the elevator doors that closed behind him with a whisper. I stood there, still holding my final paycheck, the paper warm from my hands. For the first time that morning, I felt the weight of everything I'd lost, and the strange, unshakable feeling that the story wasn't over yet. As I picked up my final paycheck, the CEO walked by and paused, his eyes lingering just long enough to mean something. Some truths feel heavier than lies, especially when you carry them alone. The rain had started by the time I left Langford Tower, thin and cold, needling through my jacket as if the sky itself had decided to take one last swing at me. I didn't run for shelter. I just walked, head down, steps slow, the world around me fading into noise. Horns, voices, traffic, all of it blended into a hum that felt far away. The envelope in my hand had already begun to soak through, the ink bleeding slightly where my name was printed. It didn't matter. I didn't even want the money inside. I just needed to keep walking. By the time I reached our apartment, my clothes clung to my skin, and my body felt hollow, like I'd been carved out and left to dry. The hallway smelled like wet carpet and cigarette smoke. I could hear the faint sound of the neighbor's TV through the walls, laughter from a sitcom that didn't match the heaviness in my chest. I stood outside our door for a full minute before turning the key. Inside, the warmth hit me like memory. The soft hum of our heater, the faint scent of mac and cheese, the little drawings taped along the wall where Ethan had measured his growth with pencil marks. Everything was the same. Everything except me. "Dad!" His voice came from the kitchen, bright and eager. "You're home early." For a second, I just stood there, letting the sound of him fill the space between us. Then I forced a smile and stepped inside. "Yeah, buddy. Guess I got lucky today." He turned, face glowing, holding a paper ribbon with shaky handwriting. "First place, science fair." "You won," I said, my voice catching. He nodded, grinning. "You said you'd come, but it's okay. Mrs. Thompson took pictures. Look!" He reached for his tablet, scrolling through photos. "That's me with the judges. They said my model could actually work if I had the right parts." I tried to laugh, but it came out wrong. "That's incredible, Ethan. You did it." He beamed, too proud to notice how quiet I'd gone. I watched him talk, hands moving, eyes alive, and all I could think about was how I'd lost the one thing that kept our lives from collapsing. But how could I tell him that? How could I take this moment, this one bright piece of his world, and stain it with my failure? So I didn't. I sat down, nodded, asked questions about circuits and motors, pretended to follow along while my mind drifted to rent notices and unpaid bills. Every time he smiled, it hurt more. Because beneath that smile was trust, blind, unshaken trust, and I didn't deserve it. "Hey, Dad," he said after a while. "You okay?" The question hit harder than it should have. Kids see more than we think they do. "Just tired," I said. "Long day." He frowned a little, then went back to his project. "You always say that," I forced a laugh. "That's because it's always true." After dinner, he went to his room to work on another design, and I sat at the kitchen table staring at the wall. The clock ticked too loudly. The refrigerator hummed in short bursts. Everything in that tiny apartment suddenly felt smaller, like the walls had moved closer, trapping me with my thoughts. I took the soaked envelope from my jacket, tore it open, and counted. 2 weeks' pay. That was it. Enough for groceries, maybe part of the rent. After that, nothing. My hands shook as I folded the bills back into the envelope. I couldn't tell him. Not tonight. Not while he was still proud of himself. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes, letting exhaustion pull at me. But rest wouldn't come, because behind my eyelids, the memory kept replaying. That morning, the voicemail, the voice from the hospital. "This is St. Luke's Hospital. It's about your son." That was why I'd been late. Not laziness, not carelessness, just fear, the kind that steals time without permission. 2 weeks earlier, Ethan had collapsed during gym class. They called it dehydration at first, but I knew it was more. He'd been getting nosebleeds, headaches, growing pale even under summer sun. The doctor ordered tests. "Just to be sure," he'd said. And then came the waiting. Days stretched like months. Every ring of the phone a new wave of panic. That morning, while I was getting ready for work, the call had come through. I didn't answer it right away because I was already running late. But when I saw the hospital's name flash across the screen, something inside me froze. I'd stepped into the hallway, heart pounding, and pressed play on the voicemail. The nurse's voice was calm, professional, but it carried a weight that stopped me cold. "Mr. Carter, this is regarding your son's test results. Please call us back as soon as possible." That was all. No details, no reassurance, just a request, one that sounded too urgent to ignore. So I had stood there, torn between two choices, the job that kept us fed or the call that could change everything. In the end, I made the mistake of believing I could handle both. Now, sitting in that small kitchen, the truth sat on my chest like a stone. I had lost the job because I tried to be a good father. And yet, if the tests were bad, even that might not be enough. I rubbed my face, trying to push the thought away, but it wouldn't leave. I thought about the hospital's fluorescent lights, the smell of antiseptic, the look on a nurse's face when she knows something you don't want to hear. What if it was something serious? What if that's what the call meant? I couldn't afford to think about it. I couldn't afford anything, really. From down the hallway, I heard Ethan humming. Some tune he'd made up, off-key but warm. That sound alone was enough to keep me upright. Whatever came next, I had to face it quietly, carefully. He didn't need to carry my fear on top of his own. I stood, rinsed the dishes, and checked the locks. Little routines that made the night feel normal. Before heading to bed, I peeked into his room. He was already asleep, one arm dangling over the side of the bed, his project still glowing faintly on the desk. I turned off the light and whispered, "I'll fix this, buddy. I promise." The promise tasted like guilt, because I didn't know if I could keep it. I lay awake long after midnight, staring at the ceiling, listening to the city breathe through the thin apartment walls. Every sound, every distant siren, every creak of the pipes felt heavier, as if the world itself was waiting for something to happen. And then, just as I started to drift, a dull thud broke the silence. A sound from the hallway. I got up, opened the door, and found an envelope lying on the floor just inside the doorframe. White, crisp, official. The hospital's logo printed neatly in the corner. For a long moment, I didn't move. My fingers hovered over it, my breath caught in my throat. Ethan's name was printed in bold across the front. That night, a hospital envelope arrived with my son's name printed in bold. I'd spent years fighting to stay strong, but nothing prepares you for hearing your child's name in a code blue. It happened 3 days before everything fell apart. Before Reed, before the firing, before I became the man standing in the rain clutching a soaked envelope. That night started like any other. Dinner was cheap, laughter was easy, and for a brief moment, life didn't feel so heavy. Ethan was working on a school project at the table, wires and batteries spread out like a miniature battlefield. I was watching the late-night news, half listening, half dreaming about sleep I never seemed to get. Then came the sound that still haunts me. A crash, a gasp, and silence. At first, I thought he'd dropped something. But when I turned, Ethan was on the floor. His face was pale, his body shaking. I called his name once, then louder, but his lips were already turning blue. My world narrowed to the sound of my own heartbeat and the desperate rasp of his failing breath. "Ethan! Hey, look at me!" I dropped beside him, shaking his shoulders, my hands useless. He didn't move. His eyes rolled back. His chest stopped. I don't remember grabbing the phone. Only the operator's voice asking for our address, her tone calm while mine broke apart. I remember counting compressions out loud, my hands pressing against his ribs, begging him to breathe. The seconds stretched into eternity, each one heavier than the last. When the sirens finally cut through the night, I was already halfway gone with fear. The paramedics moved fast, faster than my mind could process. One lifted Ethan onto the stretcher, while the other shouted numbers I didn't understand. BP dropping, pulse thready. I followed them down the stairs barefoot, still in my work clothes, rain starting to fall through the open doorway. Someone asked if there was a history of seizures. I didn't know. I didn't know anything. At the hospital, everything blurred. Bright lights, the smell of antiseptic, the squeak of rubber soles on polished floors. I followed the gurney through swinging doors until a nurse stopped me with a hand to my chest. "You can't go in there, sir." "But he's my son." Her expression softened, but her voice stayed firm. "They're working on him. Please wait here." So I waited, in a plastic chair under fluorescent light that made everything look too sharp. The clock on the wall moved slow enough to feel cruel. Every few minutes, a voice over the intercom announced another emergency. Then it happened. 2 words that split my world in half. Code Blue, Pediatric Ward. It took a second for my brain to catch up, but when I heard the nurse repeat it into the phone, "Carter, Ethan, room 12. My body stopped working. I tried to stand, but my knees buckled. My hands went cold, my vision blurred, and all I could think was that my boy, my whole reason for surviving, was dying behind a door I couldn't open. I must have said his name 100 times under my breath. Each repetition was a prayer and a punishment. When the doors finally opened, a doctor came out, his mask hanging loose around his neck, sweat on his forehead. For a moment he didn't speak. Then he nodded slightly. "He's stable," he said. "We got him back." Those words didn't sound real. I wanted to believe them, but my body refused to relax. "Can I see him?" I asked, my voice shaking. He hesitated. "In a moment. He needs rest. We're still running tests." "Tests?" The doctor exchanged a look with the nurse. "There are signs of an underlying condition. We won't know more until the results come in." My heart sank. "What kind of condition?" "Let's not jump ahead," he said carefully. "For now, he's breathing. That's what matters." He turned to leave, but I stopped him. "Wait, what caused it?" He sighed. "Sometimes the body just shuts down under pressure. Sometimes it's something deeper. We'll know soon." That "soon" became the most terrifying word I'd ever heard. When they finally let me in, the room was quiet except for the beeping of machines. Ethan lay still, wires running from his arms, a small oxygen mask fogging with every breath. His chest rose and fell, fragile but steady. I sat beside the bed and held his hand, tracing the faint scar on his knuckle from when he'd fallen off his bike years ago. "You scared me, kid," I whispered. "Don't do that again." He didn't answer, but his fingers twitched slightly against mine, a small stubborn sign that he was still fighting. Hours passed like that. Nurses came and went, adjusting. Tubes, checking monitors. The world outside kept turning, but inside that room, time was broken. I'd never felt so powerless. I thought about all the times I'd told him I'd protect him. The bedtime promises, the soft reassurances that everything would be okay. I realized now how fragile those words were. They meant nothing against the weight of reality. When morning came, the doctor returned, holding a clipboard. "We're keeping him overnight," he said. "There are some irregularities in his blood work. Nothing conclusive yet, but we'll need to do more tests." I nodded numbly. "Do whatever you need." He gave a small, practiced smile. "We will. But there's something else you should prepare for." My stomach turned. "What do you mean?" "Insurance," he said. "Your coverage through Langford only applies to active employees. If you're between pay cycles or laid off, you'll need to handle part of the balance out of pocket." I blinked, not understanding. "Balance?" He cleared his throat. "We'll have someone from billing come by to explain. Just be ready." Those words sank deep, like a slow knife twisting under my ribs. I didn't even know what "be ready" meant anymore. That was the night that changed everything. Not the firing, not the shame. This. Watching my son's chest rise and fall under the glow of machines. Realizing that life could stop in an instant and the world wouldn't even flinch. I sat there until the sun rose, the sky turning pale gray outside the window. Ethan's breathing had steadied, but mine hadn't. I didn't dare leave his side. When the nurse finally came in with breakfast trays, I asked if I could step out for a minute to call my job. I thought if I explained, if I told them what happened, they'd understand. I thought people still believed in compassion. I was wrong. That morning, when I left the hospital to call my supervisor, I was already late. And by the time I came back, everything had changed. Again. The doctor met me outside Ethan's room. His expression was polite, but I could see exhaustion behind his eyes. "He's stable for now," he said quietly. "But we'll need to run more tests next week." I nodded, my throat dry. "Thank you." He hesitated before turning away. "There's someone who needs to talk to you about the bill." The doctor says, "There's someone who needs to talk to you about the bill." I thought I'd been erased from that company, until the man who built it looked straight into my eyes. Hospitals have a strange way of making everyone equal. Pain doesn't care about your paycheck. Sitting in that sterile waiting room, surrounded by the quiet hum of machines and the steady shuffle of nurses, I almost forgot what it felt like to be invisible. Almost. Ethan was asleep upstairs, his heartbeat steady again, but fragile. I'd spent the night beside his bed, afraid to close my eyes. Afraid that if I blinked too long, he'd slip away. When the nurse insisted I take a break, I wandered to the lobby, more ghost than man. That's when I saw him. He didn't belong there, not in this wing with its cracked tiles and old paint. Even from a distance, he looked out of place, his tailored gray suit, the kind of quiet authority that made people move without him having to ask. He was talking to a nurse, his voice low, his expression unreadable. Then he turned, and our eyes met. For a moment, time folded in on itself. It was him. Jonathan Hale, the CEO of Langford Industries. The same man whose picture hung in the lobby I'd spent 6 years polishing. The same face that appeared on company newsletters beside words like excellence, innovation, leadership. I'd seen that face 100 times, but I'd never expected him to see mine. At first, I thought I was imagining it, that maybe exhaustion was playing tricks on me. But then he looked again. Not a passing glance, not curiosity, but recognition. A flicker of memory crossed his face, and I knew he remembered me. The janitor. The man Reed fired in the lobby 2 days ago. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. The sounds around us, the echo of heels on tile, the buzz of an intercom, faded into something distant. He tilted his head slightly, like he was trying to place me, and then he started walking toward me. My throat tightened. My first instinct was to leave, to disappear before he could ask the one question I couldn't answer. "What are you doing here?" But my body wouldn't move. "Mr. Carter, isn't it?" His voice was steady, calm, the kind of tone that didn't need volume to command attention. I nodded. "Yes, sir." He looked me over, not in the way Reed did, not with judgment, but as if he was searching for something. "You used to work for Langford?" "I did," I said quietly. "What happened?" There it was, the question that had been circling me since that morning. I wanted to tell him everything. About Ethan, the hospital, the call that made me late. But something about the weight of his gaze made it hard to speak. Pride, maybe. Shame. I wasn't sure which. "I was late," I said finally. 3 times. He raised an eyebrow. "That's it?" "That's policy," I replied. He nodded slowly, glancing towards the nurse's station. "And now you're here." "My son," I said, my voice breaking slightly. "He's sick." That caught his attention. His eyes softened, just a fraction. "What's wrong?" "We don't know yet. They're still running tests." He studied me for a long moment. I could see the gears turning behind his composed expression, the way he measured people not by words, but by how they carried themselves when they had nothing left. Then, almost to himself, he said, "You're handling this better than most." I didn't know what to say to that. My hands were shaking. My stomach was empty, and I hadn't slept in nearly 2 days. But I wasn't about to break in front of him. He slipped a business card from his pocket and handed it to me. "If you need anything, call my office. I'll make sure it reaches me." I hesitated before taking it. The card was thick, embossed with silver lettering that caught the fluorescent light. Jonathan Hale, Chief Executive Officer. "Thank you," I said, "but I don't want charity." He smiled faintly. "It's not charity if it's deserved." Before I could answer, a nurse approached. "Mr. Hale, the board meeting is starting soon." He nodded. "Give me a moment." Then he looked back at me. "I'll be in touch, Mr. Carter." And just like that, he was gone. I sat there for a long time, staring at the business card in my hand. It felt unreal, like holding something from a life that didn't belong to me. The man who ran the company that had thrown me out had just spoken to me like an equal. Not a janitor. Not a problem. Just a father standing by his son's hospital bed. I slipped the card into my pocket, unsure if I'd ever use it. Men like him didn't really make promises to men like me. Still, for the first time in days, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Seen. When I went back upstairs, Ethan was awake, smiling weakly. "Hey, Dad," he murmured, his voice raspy. "Hey, champ," I said, forcing brightness into my tone. "How are you feeling?" "Better. Did you find out if you can go back to work?" I swallowed. "Not yet. But maybe soon." He nodded, satisfied, and drifted back to sleep. I sat beside him, staring out the window as the city lights flickered in the distance. The world outside kept moving, taxis honking, lights glowing, people rushing, while inside, time felt still. I thought about Jonathan Hale, about the look in his eyes when he realized who I was, about the quiet, deliberate way he'd said, "I'll be in touch." Maybe he meant it. Maybe he didn't. But either way, something had shifted. Because for the first time since losing my job, I didn't just feel like a man who'd been fired. I felt like a man who'd been noticed. That night I barely slept. Every time my phone buzzed, I checked it, half expecting nothing, half hoping for a miracle. And then, just as dawn began to seep through the blinds, it came. A missed call, an unfamiliar number with an extension I recognized from my old employee directory. Langford Industries. The next morning, I received a call from an unfamiliar number, from the top floor. When a man like him calls someone like me, it's never by mistake. The call came just after sunrise. The sky outside our apartment was pale and uncertain, the kind of gray that could turn into either rain or light, depending on how the day decided to go. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, the number unfamiliar but marked with an area code I recognized immediately. Langford's corporate exchange. For a moment, I just stared at it. My mind ran in circles. Maybe it was HR confirming my termination. Maybe they'd discovered a clerical error. Maybe it was nothing at all. Hope and fear are two sides of the same blade, and both cut deep. I answered on the third ring, my voice rough from a night without sleep. "Hello? Mr. Carter?" The voice was crisp, professional, female. "This is Ms. Bryant. Mr. Hale would like to meet with you this morning. Can you be at the Langford Tower by 9? For a second, I thought I'd misheard. "Mr. Hale? The CEO?" "Yes, sir. He asked for you personally." I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. I don't work there anymore." There was a pause on the line, then, "He's aware of that." When the call ended, I just stood there, staring at the phone like it had given me a command I didn't know how to follow. My mind raced through every possibility, every reason a man like Jonathan Hale would summon someone like me. Gratitude? Pity? A PR stunt? I didn't know. But one thing was certain. You don't say no when the top floor calls. I looked toward Ethan's room. He was still asleep, breathing softly, his face peaceful against the pillow. I thought about waking him to say goodbye, but I didn't want him to see the fear I couldn't hide. I left a note on the table instead. "Be good. I'll be back soon. Love, Dad." The train ride downtown felt longer than ever. Every vibration of the tracks rattled through my nerves. I tried to calm my thoughts, but questions kept surfacing like air bubbles in deep water. What if it was a trap? What if Reed had filed a complaint? What if Hale regretted speaking to me at all? By the time I stepped off the train, my palms were slick with sweat. The tower loomed ahead, taller than memory, its mirrored windows catching the morning light. For 6 years, I'd entered through the service entrance, carrying a mop and the weight of small survival. But that morning, for the first time, I walked toward the front doors. Security recognized me immediately. One of the guards, a man I used to joke with during late shifts, blinked in confusion. "Carter, you back already?" "Not exactly," I said quietly, showing him the printed appointment confirmation Ms. Bryant had sent. His eyebrows rose as he scanned it. Then he picked up the phone, whispered something, and nodded. "Go ahead. Elevator's waiting." The words didn't sound real. I stepped into the glass elevator, the kind that looked out over the city as it climbed. My reflection stared back at me, worn jacket, frayed cuffs, the faint trace of exhaustion etched into every line of my face. The higher I rose, the smaller everything below seemed. The streets, the cars, the life I'd lived. By the time the doors opened on the 47th floor, I felt like I'd crossed into another world. The hallway was silent, lined with dark wood and framed photographs of smiling executives. The air smelled faintly of leather and polished stone. At the end of the corridor, a woman in a black blazer stood waiting. "Mr. Carter?" "Yes." "Mr. Hale is expecting you." She led me into his office, and I stopped short. I'd cleaned this floor before, but I'd never seen this room from the inside. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, sunlight spilling across a desk that probably cost more than my car. Jonathan Hale stood by the window, hands in his pockets, looking out over everything he owned. He turned when he heard me enter. "Mr. Carter," he said, smiling faintly. "Thank you for coming." "Of course, sir." I stood awkwardly near the door, unsure if I should move closer. "Please, sit," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite his desk. I sat carefully, the leather soft but unfamiliar. My hands rested on my knees, still trembling slightly. He took his seat, folding his hands, studying me with the kind of quiet curiosity that made words feel unnecessary. "How's your son?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. "He's better. Stable, at least. They're still running tests." He nodded thoughtfully. "I'm glad to hear that." A silence followed. Not uncomfortable, but heavy. The kind that feels like both a test and an invitation. I waited for him to speak again. But when he didn't, I filled the gap. "I didn't expect to hear from you, sir." "I'm sure you didn't," he said. "But after seeing you at the hospital, I couldn't stop thinking about it, about what happened. Reed filed your termination report." I swallowed. "That sounds about right." He described you as unreliable, unmotivated, and repeatedly insubordinate. I looked down, my jaw tightening. "That's one version of the truth. And yours?" His tone didn't change, still calm, still even, but his eyes were fixed on me. I hesitated. "I was late," I said finally, "but not because I didn't care. My son, he'd collapsed. I got the call that morning. I tried to make it on time, but I couldn't leave him alone. By the time I got there, Reed had already decided what kind of man I was." Hale leaned back in his chair, silent. The light from the window caught the edge of his watch, a brief flash of silver. "And you didn't tell him?" He didn't ask. Something shifted in his expression, not pity, but understanding. "You've worked for this company for how long?" 6 years. "Never missed a shift before?" "Not once." He nodded again, thoughtful. "Funny. Reed's report didn't mention that." I didn't respond. The room felt too big for words. Hale stood and walked to the window, staring down at the streets below. "You know," he said quietly, "people like to think success is built on merit, hard work, intelligence, dedication. But that's not always true. Sometimes it's just about who gets seen and who doesn't." I looked up, meeting his reflection in the glass. "And people like me usually don't." He turned, eyes meeting mine. For a long time, he said nothing. Then he walked back to his desk, leaned forward slightly, and asked one simple, quiet question. "Why were you late that day?" He asks one quiet question. Why were you late that day? Sometimes the hardest stories to tell are the ones that make people see you for the first time. For a long moment, I didn't answer. The question hung in the air between us, heavier than it should have been. Why were you late that day? It was such a simple question, but the truth behind it was anything but simple. My throat tightened, and I could feel my pulse beating in my neck. No one had ever asked before, not Reed, not HR, not anyone at Langford. They'd all assumed they already knew the kind of man I was. But Jonathan Hale wasn't assuming. He was waiting. I took a slow breath, my fingers twisting together in my lap. "I was late," I said quietly, "because my son stopped breathing." His expression didn't change, but the space between us shifted. He didn't look away, didn't speak, just listened. It was unnerving how steady he was. Most people flinched when you said something like that, like grief was contagious. He didn't. I told him everything. The night it happened. The sound of Ethan's body hitting the floor. The panic, the ambulance, the sterile corridors of the hospital, The endless hours waiting, praying, bargaining with whatever force might have been listening. My voice trembled as I spoke. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. I told him about the doctors, the uncertainty, the words underlying condition that had been echoing in my head ever since. I told him about the bills, the insurance that would vanish with my termination, the fear that had been sitting in my stomach like lead. And then I told him about the morning I'd been late, the voicemail from the hospital, the choice I'd had to make. I thought maybe I could do both, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Call them, get to work, hold it together. But when you're standing in a hallway with your kid's life in someone else's hands, time doesn't move the same way anymore. Minutes feel like hours, and by the time I came back to myself, I was already late. I ran all the way to Langford, thinking I could still fix it. But Reed didn't even let me explain. The words poured out faster now, years of silence breaking open all at once. He fired me in front of everyone, in front of the guards, the receptionists, like I was nothing. And I just stood there. Because what was I supposed to say? That my son might die and that's why I missed the clock by a few minutes? That being a good father cost me my job? It wouldn't have mattered. People like me don't get the benefit of the doubt. I stopped talking. My throat ached, my chest tight. The office was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Hale hadn't moved, hadn't interrupted. His face was unreadable, but his eyes. There was something there. Something I couldn't quite name. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on the skyline outside. The light from the window caught the sharp edge of his profile, outlining him like a photograph. You didn't tell anyone, he said finally. No one asked, I replied. He nodded slowly, still looking out the window. And your son? How is he now? He's stable, for now, but they're running more tests. The doctors think it could be a heart condition. A long silence followed. The kind that feels endless. The kind that makes every second stretch until it hurts. I wasn't sure what I expected him to say. An apology, maybe, or a polite dismissal. Instead, he asked, "What do you need?" The question caught me off guard. "Sir? What do you need?" he repeated. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Because I didn't know how to answer. I needed everything. Money, stability, a job, a future for my son. But saying that out loud felt like begging, and I'd spent my whole life trying not to beg. "I don't know," I said finally. "I just want to be able to take care of him." He studied me for a long moment, his eyes sharper now, more focused. "You worked 6 years at Langford. No complaints on your record until this. Reed said you were punctual, efficient, quiet, the kind of employee who made things run smoothly without being seen." I nodded once. "And you never asked for a raise?" I didn't have time to ask for favors. Something flickered in his expression. Not pity, but understanding. A recognition of something he'd lost long ago. "You remind me of my father," he said softly. He worked nights in a factory. I used to wait up for him, even when my mother told me not to. He'd come home exhausted, hands shaking from the machines, but he never complained. I thought he was strong because he never broke. Now I know he was strong because he broke every day and kept going anyway. He turned back to me. "You're not invisible, Mr. Carter. You just work in a world that forgets how to look down." I didn't know what to say. No one had ever spoken to me like that before. Not a boss, not a colleague, no one. For a moment, I almost forgot where I was. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, frowned, and stood. "I have to take this," he said, stepping towards the window. I sat there, staring at my hands, the weight of the conversation pressing on me. My palms were slick with sweat, my breath unsteady. Had I said too much? Should I have stayed quiet? Played it safe? When he finished the call, he didn't return to his chair. He stood by the window for a moment, his back to me, the city stretching out below him. I couldn't see his face, only his reflection. A man caught between power and conscience. Finally, he said, "You've given me a lot to think about. His tone was calm, but there was something final in it. A closing door. He turned, walked to his desk, and picked up a folder. For a second, I thought he was reaching for his wallet, or maybe another business card. Instead, he nodded once, polite, distant, and started toward the door. I stood quickly. "Mr. Hale," I said, my voice breaking through the quiet. "I'm sorry if I said too much. I just thought you should know." He stopped in the doorway but didn't turn around. "You said exactly what you needed to, Mr. Carter." And then he walked out. The office door closed softly behind him, leaving only silence. I sank back into the chair, the view of the city stretching endlessly in front of me. The sound of the clock on the wall ticked louder now, every second echoing like a heartbeat. I stared at the empty doorway, trying to understand what had just happened. Had I ruined it? Had I said too much? Or had I finally been heard, only for it not to matter? The sunlight shifted across the desk, washing over the polished surface until it was too bright to look at. My reflection stared back at me from the glass. Smaller than ever. For the first time since that awful morning, I let the weight of everything settle. The shame, the exhaustion, the hope I hadn't wanted to feel. And sitting there, surrounded by everything I'd never have, I realized I might have just lost the only chance I didn't even know I'd been given. The CEO stands, walks out without a word, and I fear I've lost everything twice. I didn't believe in miracles until one called me back to work. 2 days passed after the meeting with Mr. Hale, and each hour felt heavier than the last. Every time the phone rang, I jumped, expecting something, an answer, a rejection, a lifeline. But it was never him. It was always the hospital, or a bill collector, or another reminder of how quickly your life can shrink when the world stops seeing you as useful. I tried to stay busy. I fixed the loose cabinet in the kitchen. I sorted the laundry. I made soup I couldn't eat. Anything to keep from thinking about the silence that followed that conversation in his office. The silence that had said, "Thank you for your honesty. Goodbye." Then, on the third morning, the phone finally rang again. "Mr. Carter?" The voice was clipped, official. "This is Human Resources at Langford Industries." My stomach dropped. I braced myself for another bureaucratic reminder that I'd been terminated, some final notice about returning my badge. "Yes," I said cautiously. "There's been a review of your case," the woman continued. "Effective immediately, your employment has been reinstated. You'll report to the maintenance department at Building 2 starting tomorrow at 8 a.m. I blinked, unsure if I'd heard right. "Reinstated?" "Yes, same pay rate, same benefits, full seniority. You'll be reporting to a new supervisor." My throat tightened. "May I ask who approved this?" There was a pause, just long enough to mean something. "It came from upper management," she said carefully. "That's all I can tell you." By the time the call ended, my hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. I sat down on the edge of the bed, staring at the faded wallpaper, trying to make sense of it. After everything, the humiliation, the firing, the way Reed had looked through me like I was trash. I was back. No warning, no explanation, just back. Ethan shuffled out of his room, rubbing his eyes. "Dad? You okay?" I nodded slowly. "I think so. I got my job back." He blinked, confused at first. Then his whole face lit up. "Really? That's great!" He climbed onto my lap, hugging my neck tightly. "I told you it would work out. I prayed for it." I smiled, though my eyes stung. "Maybe your prayers are louder than mine?" The next morning, I put on my uniform, the same dark blue coveralls I'd folded away after getting fired. It smelled faintly of bleach and machine oil, and for the first time, that smell didn't make me feel small. It made me feel alive. When I stepped through the front doors of Langford Tower, everything felt different. The marble floors gleamed like always. The reception desk buzzed with morning chatter. But now people were looking at me. Not quite staring, but noticing. Some nodded politely. Others looked away. A few whispered behind their hands. I didn't care. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't invisible. In the locker room, a few of the guys from the old crew were getting ready. One of them, Marvin, a tall man with tired eyes, looked up when I walked in. "Well, I'll be damned," he said. "Back from the dead." "Looks like it," I replied, forcing a small smile. He shook his head. "Reed's been walking around here like someone stole his dog. Heard he got chewed out by corporate. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" I didn't answer, but he laughed anyway. Didn't think so. Later, when I passed Reed's old office, I saw the nameplate had been removed. A new one hung there now. A. Turner, maintenance supervisor. Turner was younger, quieter, and, judging by the nod he gave me, fairer. "Glad to have you back, Carter," he said. "We could use someone dependable." "Thank you, sir," I replied. And meant it. The day passed in a blur of small victories. I fixed a faulty air vent, polished brass railings until they glowed, and cleaned a conference room so spotless I could see my reflection in the table. My body remembered the rhythm, the comfort of honest work. But something else was different, too. People noticed. Around lunchtime, I caught sight of Mr. Hale walking down the corridor. He was talking with a group of board members, all suits and confidence, but when his eyes met mine, he gave the smallest nod, almost imperceptible, but real. It wasn't a smile, it wasn't approval, it was acknowledgement. And somehow, that was enough. By the end of the week, I'd fallen back into a rhythm. Work, hospital, home. But small things kept happening that didn't feel like coincidence. When I came back from lunch one day, I found a new pair of work boots waiting in my locker. My size, brand new, no note. The next morning, a replacement badge appeared on my cart before I even had a chance to request one. At first, I thought it was Turner's doing, just a good boss looking out for his team. But then, at the hospital, I started noticing something stranger. The nurses were different, friendlier. They greeted me by name now. The doctor started scheduling Ethan's tests faster, his appointments easier to get. One afternoon, when I went to pay for a prescription, the receptionist smiled. "It's already covered," she said. "Covered?" I repeated. "Yes, Mr. Carter. It says here the balance has been settled." I frowned, pulling out my wallet. "That can't be right." She turned the monitor so I could see for myself. My name, my son's account, and next to it, a zero balance. The words "paid in full" stared back at me, glowing in green letters. I felt dizzy. "There must be a mistake." She shook her head gently. "No mistake. It was processed yesterday. Anonymous payment." I stood there, unable to speak. The people behind me in line shifted impatiently, but I didn't move. I couldn't. Anonymous. I walked out into the cool air, the paper receipt trembling in my hand. My first thought was disbelief. My second was fear. Nothing in my life had ever come without a cost. That's when I noticed the car parked across the street. A black sedan, windows tinted, the kind of car you only see when someone important is inside. As I started toward the bus stop, the rear window rolled down just enough for me to see him. Jonathan Hale. He didn't wave, didn't smile, just nodded once, then the car pulled away. I stood there on the curb, watching the taillights disappear into the traffic, my heart pounding in my chest. There was no note, no signature, no explanation. But I knew. I knew exactly who had done it. The man who fired me hadn't saved me. The man who listened had. I looked down at the receipt again, the bold letters catching the light. Paid in full. For the first time in a long time, I felt the weight of survival lift just a little. The father discovers his son's hospital bill has been paid in full, anonymously. Power hides pain well, but pain recognizes its reflection. The next day, just before sunset, there was a knock on my apartment door. It wasn't the kind of knock that came from neighbors. Too calm, too deliberate. When I opened it, Jonathan Hale stood there, still in his suit, the city's fading light glinting off his cufflinks. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming. "Mr. Hale?" I said, startled. What are you? He gave a small, polite smile. May I come in? I hesitated, glancing over my shoulder at the worn walls, the chipped paint, the dishes still drying by the sink. Then I nodded. Of course. He stepped inside quietly, looking around the room without judgment. The space was small, a couch that sagged in the middle, a coffee table scarred by years of use, a picture of Ethan and me taped to the wall because I couldn't afford a frame. It wasn't much, but it was home. Can I get you something? I asked awkwardly. He shook his head. No, thank you. He looked tired, not physically, but the kind of tired that sits behind the eyes. He glanced at the photo of my son and smiled faintly. He looks like you. Poor kid, I said, forcing a laugh. That earned a quiet chuckle from him. Then, for a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us wasn't tense, but it was heavy, full of things that didn't need to be said. Finally, he turned to me. You found out about the hospital bill. I nodded slowly. I did. I didn't know how to thank you. He waved it off. You don't owe me thanks, Mr. Carter. You owed the world a fair chance. I just paid what it already owed you. His words caught me off guard. For a man whose name sat at the top of a corporation, he didn't speak like one. There was something quieter in him, something bruised. Can I ask why? I said softly. Why help me? Why now? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked to the window, looking out over the alleyway where kids sometimes played with a flat basketball. His voice, when it came, was softer. Because I've been you. I frowned. I don't understand. He turned slightly, the dying sunlight cutting across half his face. 20 years ago, before Langford was anything, I worked nights at a shipping dock. My wife, Claire, she was sick. Cancer. We couldn't afford treatment. I tried to hold 2 jobs, but one night I missed a shift because she couldn't breathe. He stopped for a moment, his jaw tightening. My supervisor fired me on the spot. Said rules were rules. We lost our insurance the same week. She died a month later. The words hung there, raw and simple. He didn't flinch when he said them. He'd clearly told this story before, maybe to himself, maybe to no one. I promised myself, he continued, that if I ever had the power to stop someone from going through that kind of humiliation again, I would. But power has a strange way of making you forget the promises you made when you were powerless. He turned to face me fully now. You reminded me. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The image of him, the man who owned half the city, standing in my dim apartment, confessing loss, didn't fit the world I knew. People like him weren't supposed to understand people like me. But there he was, standing in the same kind of grief I'd been carrying for years. I'm sorry, I said quietly, for what you went through. He nodded once, accepting the sympathy without pity. Loss makes strange men equal, Mr. Carter. You lose enough, and titles stop meaning much. We sat down at the table, the same one Ethan and I ate breakfast on every morning. He looked around the room again, studying the small details, the repair tape on the lamp cord, the patched jacket hanging by the door, the drawings my son had taped to the fridge. You've done a lot with very little, he said. That kind of resilience, it's rare. I shrugged. You do what you have to. He leaned forward slightly. You did more than that. You kept your dignity. That's not something I see often anymore. For the first time since I'd met him, his voice cracked just a little, not from emotion, but honesty. When I saw you that day in the hospital, I realized I'd been running a company built on efficiency, not humanity. People like Reed were reflections of me, of what I'd let my success become. That didn't sit right. So you helped me to make it right? He shook his head. No. I helped you because you reminded me of who I was before I stopped caring about people like us. The word us caught me off guard. Outside, the city hummed, car horns, sirens, laughter drifting from the street below. But inside it felt like time had slowed. He looked down, his expression softening. I'm not here to talk about charity, Carter. I came because I believe you can do more. You've seen the world from the bottom up. You understand the people who keep this place running. I need that perspective back in my company. I frowned slightly. "I'm just a janitor, sir." He smiled faintly. That's what they used to call me, too. We sat in silence for a long while after that. Two men, one in a $1,000 suit, the other in a faded work shirt, sitting at a kitchen table that had seen too many long nights and not enough miracles. When he finally stood, I rose too. He adjusted his cufflinks, an old habit of men who were taught to hide their emotions behind small movements. "I want to show you something," he said. "Come to my office tomorrow morning." I hesitated. "What for?" He gave a small, almost mischievous smile. "Consider it the start of something new." And just like that, he turned and left. When the door closed behind him, I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space he'd left. The apartment felt smaller now, but in a strange way, brighter too. For years, I'd thought power and pain lived in different worlds. But that night, I realized they were just two sides of the same coin, both searching for redemption in their own quiet way. The CEO says, "I want to show you something. Come to my office tomorrow." I thought I'd been rehired, but what he gave me that day was far greater than a job. The next morning, I stood outside Langford Tower again, the same building where I'd once been fired without a word of mercy. The same glass walls that had watched me sweep its floors for years now reflected my face back at me. Older, wearier, but different. The air was crisp, the kind of morning that felt like a clean slate. I'd barely slept the night before, my mind spinning with questions. What could he possibly want to show me? Why me? When I reached the reception desk, the young woman behind it looked up in surprise. "Mr. Carter?" she said, smiling nervously. "Mr. Hale is expecting you." Those words still sounded foreign. Expecting you. No one had ever been expecting me anywhere before. The elevator ride to the top floor felt longer than usual. Each ding of the passing floors echoed like a memory. The day I was fired, the humiliation, the quiet walk to the bus stop that followed. I had walked into that building broken. I was walking in now, uncertain but standing taller. When the doors opened, Mr. Hale was already waiting by the window, sunlight washing over him. He turned as I entered, his posture relaxed but purposeful. "Glad you came," he said. "I wasn't sure if I should," I admitted. He smiled faintly. "That's exactly why I wanted you to." He gestured toward the large table in the center of the room. On it lay a single folder, a set of keys, and a white envelope sealed in gold wax. The weight of it all seemed far too great for such simple objects. "Sit down," he said. I obeyed, feeling out of place in a chair that probably cost more than my entire apartment. "You told me something last time we spoke," he began. "You said you just wanted to take care of your son. That's what stuck with me. Most people in this building work for status, numbers, competition. You work for something real." He paused, his voice softening. "I built this company from nothing. But somewhere along the way, I forgot what nothing actually feels like. You reminded me." I didn't know how to respond, so I stayed quiet. He placed his hand on the folder. "This is yours." I frowned. "What is it?" "An offer?" he said simply. "Not a promotion, not charity, a partnership." The word didn't register at first. "Partnership?" He nodded. "You know this building better than anyone, every inch of it. You've seen how people treat those below them, how the system overlooks the very hands that keep it running. I want to change that, starting here. A new division, the Langford Foundation for Workforce Equity. You'll lead it." I stared at him. "Lead it?" He smiled. "You'll work directly with me. You'll oversee programs that support single parents, working-class families, employees in crisis, training, education, housing support, all the things that should have existed when you needed them." My mouth went dry. "Sir, I don't have a degree. I'm not—" He interrupted gently. "You're exactly what it needs, a man who's lived it. The rest, we'll teach you." I leaned back in my chair, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. It felt unreal. For years, I'd mopped floors in this building, watching the executives pass by in tailored suits. I used to wonder if they ever saw me. Now one of them was handing me a seat at their table. "I don't know what to say," I murmured. "Then don't," he said. "Just promise you'll use it the way I think you will." "I will," I said, my voice breaking. He nodded once, then slid the envelope across the table. "And this," he added, "is for Ethan." I hesitated before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a scholarship confirmation. Full tuition, 4 years, any university in the country. My son's name printed clearly at the top. I stared at it, my hands trembling. "I can't accept this," I whispered. "You can," he said firmly, "because it's not a handout. It's an investment. He's the kind of future this world needs. I'm just giving him the chance to build it." I swallowed hard. "He'll never forget this." "Neither will I," he said quietly. He stood, reaching for the keys on the table. "And they're for your new office. It's small, but the view isn't bad." I took them, the metal cool in my palm, the moment heavier than words. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Two men from different worlds, bound by something deeper than circumstance, the understanding that pain, when shared, becomes purpose. Finally, he extended his hand. "Let's build something better, together." I shook it. His grip was firm, not the handshake of a CEO to an employee, but of equals. When I left that office, the world outside felt brighter. Even the noise of traffic seemed softer somehow. For years, I'd believed that success was something meant for other people. But maybe success wasn't about rising above. Maybe it was about reaching back. That night, I came home to Ethan sitting at the kitchen table, hunched over his homework. The same chipped mug held his pencils. The same flickering light bulb buzzed overhead. But for the first time, it didn't feel small. He looked up as I walked in. "Hey, Dad, how'd it go?" I smiled. "Better than I expected." Then I handed him the envelope. He tore it open, his eyes widening as he read. "Dad, is this real?" "It's real," I said softly. "For your future." He looked back down at the letter, tracing the printed name with his thumb. Then his eyes caught on the final line. Small, handwritten beneath the printed signature. "For your future. From a man your father changed." He looked up at me, speechless. "Who wrote this?" I smiled, the answer already in my heart. Someone who finally remembered who he used to be. The son opens a letter that simply says, "For your future. From a man your father changed." Years later, one letter proved that kindness outlives power. Time has a way of softening edges. What once felt sharp and unbearable becomes something gentler, a scar that reminds you where you've been, but not what it cost to heal. 15 years passed since that day in the CEO's office, the day my life, and my son's, changed forever. Ethan grew up faster than I could have prepared for. One moment he was that frail boy in a hospital bed clutching my hand, and the next he was standing in a graduation gown, his smile wide enough to light a stadium. He'd taken every opportunity Jonathan Hale had given him and turned it into something extraordinary. Engineering degree, scholarship awards, internships, job offers, all of it earned, all of it built on the same quiet determination that used to live in my chest when I was pushing a mop down Langford's marble halls. But through it all, he never forgot where we started. He still came home every Sunday, still ate dinner at the same kitchen table, still carried the small scar on his hand from the night he fell off his bike years ago. It had healed, but it never disappeared. Neither had we. By then, I'd spent more than a decade running the Langford Foundation alongside Hale. What started as a small outreach program had grown into something far greater: educational grants, family support funds, crisis coverage for employees. It became a safety net for thousands of people who would have otherwise fallen through the cracks. Hale used to say, "If we can't make the system kinder, then what's the point of building it higher?" He'd changed too. The man who once stood behind polished glass and watched the world below now spent his mornings walking through the factory floor, greeting workers by name, shaking hands with janitors and interns alike. The suit still called him Sir, but the rest of us started calling him John. But age, like kindness, doesn't wait for permission. His hair grayed, his posture softened, and he began working shorter days. I saw him less often in the office and more often by the window, lost in thought. Sometimes he'd look at me and smile like he knew something I didn't, a quiet truth he was keeping until the world was ready. Then, one spring afternoon, I got a call from his assistant. Her voice trembled. "Mr. Carter, John isn't doing well. He asked if you could come." By the time I reached his home, the doctors had already come and gone. The mansion was quiet, sunlight pouring in through long curtains, the kind of stillness that only comes when someone's getting ready to say goodbye. He was sitting in the study, thinner now, paler, but his eyes, those sharp, searching eyes, were still the same. "Carter," he said softly. "You came." "Of course I did," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He smiled faintly. "You know, I used to think success meant never needing anyone. But in the end, the only thing that matters is who shows up." We talked for hours that day, about the company, about life, about Ethan. He asked about my son more than he asked about himself. That was who he'd become. A man who measured his own legacy by the lives he'd helped build. When I left that evening, he pressed a letter into my hand. "Not for you," he said. "For him. Someday." He passed away 2 weeks later. The city mourned him like it had lost one of its founding pillars. Newspapers called him the businessman who rediscovered his heart. But for those of us who really knew him, he was just a man who had finally made peace with his own pain. Ethan and I both attended the funeral. He stood tall in a black suit, the same one I'd worn to every job interview years ago. His eyes stayed dry until the last words were spoken. Then he slipped his hand into mine, the same way he had when he was small, and whispered, "He saved us, didn't he?" "He did," I said quietly. "And you'll save someone else someday. That's how it works." After the burial, life returned to its rhythm. The foundation kept running, the world kept spinning, and Ethan kept climbing, faster than I ever could have imagined. He didn't just follow in my footsteps, he sprinted past them. Within a few years, he'd started his own company. Not a massive corporation, but a small firm focused on renewable construction and low-income housing. "Homes for those who build them," he liked to say. I could hear Hale's influence in those words. He hired veterans, single parents, refugees, people who'd been told no too many times, and every paycheck he wrote carried a small note in the corner. "Paid in full." I never told him how much that phrase meant to me. I didn't have to. He knew. And then one morning, many years after Jonathan Hale's passing, Ethan called me into his office. He looked older now, his face marked by the kind of lines that only purpose leaves behind. There was something in his eyes, the same look I'd seen in Hale's years ago. "Dad," he said, handing me an envelope. "I wrote a letter. I'm sending it today." "To who?" He smiled. "To the man who made all of this possible." I frowned. "John's gone, son." "I know," he said. "But sometimes the people who change us deserve to be reminded they still matter, wherever they are." He turned the envelope over, sealing it. On the front, in neat handwriting, were the words, "To Jonathan Hale, from the boy you saved." He sent it to the foundation, where it would be archived with Hale's personal records. I didn't ask to read it, but a few weeks later, a copy was sent to me, a courtesy from the board. I read it in the same kitchen where everything had once started. The light from the window fell softly across the page as I unfolded it and saw my son's handwriting. "Dear Mr. Hale, I don't know if letters can reach the places where good men go, but if they can, I hope this one finds you. You probably don't remember much about me. I was the little boy in the hospital bed whose father you stopped to listen to when no one else would. The boy whose life you saved without ever stepping into an operating room. I wanted you to know that I grew up, that I'm healthy, that I'm doing what you did for me, trying to give people a chance before the world decides they don't deserve one. You once wrote to my dad that power hides pain, but pain recognizes its reflection. I didn't understand that as a kid. Now I do. It means that kindness doesn't come from strength. It comes from remembering what it feels like to be powerless. Because of you, my dad never gave up. Because of him, I learned that good men don't need wealth to be rich. They just need to care when it's hardest. You gave me more than an education. You gave me an example. And every time I sign a contract, every time I shake a hand, I hear my father's voice reminding me, be the man who looks down, because that's where you'll find the ones holding the world up. So thank you. Not for saving us, but for seeing us. Your kindness built more than a company. It built me. With gratitude. Ethan Carter. When I finished reading, I didn't move. I just sat there, staring at the paper through the blur of my own tears. My son had written what I never could. He'd found the words I'd been carrying in silence for years. Later, I visited Hale's old office, now turned into a memorial room at the foundation. His desk remained as it was, a single photo of his late wife beside a small plaque that read, "Leadership is service." I placed Ethan's letter there, next to the frame, and whispered, "You were right, John. Legacy isn't measured by what we build. It's measured by who keeps building after we're gone." And somewhere in the quiet, I swear I could almost hear him laugh, that low, knowing chuckle of a man who finally got to rest. The camera pans slowly over the letter lying on Jonathan Hale's desk. Sunlight touching the final line written in Ethan's hand. From the boy you saved. If this story touched your heart, don't just scroll away, share it. Somewhere out there, someone needs this reminder that kindness still exists. Subscribe for more stories that prove empathy can change lives. And tell me in the comments, when was the last time a stranger changed your day?